Well, you all knew it was coming. This is probably my most requested video, and trust me, I've wanted to make it for a long time. I was trying to be fair though, and only do so when I felt it was really, truly over. And folks, I think we've officially reached that point. The story of the Xbox Series X and S since its launch, and especially over the last couple of years, is legitimately unlike any other console we've seen before. It is a tale of bad bets, false promises, and countless head-scratching decisions. And it may have very well been the final death blow to a struggling hardware brand. This is how not to save a console. As I've discussed in a prior video, the Xbox One generation didn't exactly go Microsoft's way. Following a disastrous reveal event and two great bounce backs from their competitors, Xbox now found themselves in a distant third place as we entered the 2020s. The struggles of Xbox One would no doubt affect this upcoming generation, but there actually was some cause for hope in Microsoft's quest to regain the momentum they had found with Xbox 360. First off, the marketing nightmare of their previous console reveal was a thing of the past. Reception to the Series X was overall very positive. Microsoft had opted for a somewhat unusual but very welcome approach of debuting the system's name, console build, and controller all at once. What stands out to me the most when looking back on the Series X reveal and early marketing is that there was a real palpable level of confidence here from Xbox. It was clear they truly believed in their product, and while that may sound obvious, it's not always the case. I think a lot of this newfound gusto was coming from Phil Spencer himself, who would finally be seeing the culmination of his work at Xbox coming together. Phil had first been promoted to leader of Xbox back in 2014, 1 year after the Xbox One's lackluster launch. This meant he had essentially been on cleanup duty for the first initial years of his tenure. But through it all, he was planting the seeds for his own personal vision of Xbox, investing in new initiatives like backwards compatibility and Game Pass, buying countless studios to bolster their first-party output such as Ninja Theory and Double Fine, and of course, working on this new hardware. Phil had proven to be a strong face for the brand, helping to salvage the lost Xbox One generation the best he could. But now it was finally time for his version of Xbox to take center stage. You could feel how excited he was for this opportunity, and that excitement helped fuel the Xbox community as well, leading to a very positive vibe around this new generation. However, that's not to say the pre-launch marketing was all perfect. Microsoft certainly still had a few missteps along the way. For example, in May of 2020, Xbox held a presentation promising the first look at next-generation gameplay. But in reality, the event largely featured cinematics and in-engine footage as opposed to any actual gameplay. After the show, Xbox marketing lead Aaron Greenberg acknowledged their mistake and admitted it should not have been called a gameplay event. While they certainly took some heat for this, I wouldn't say it was crushing by any means, especially because Xbox's first-party game showcase was still on the horizon. This first-party focused event was held just 2 months later in July 2020, but unfortunately came alongside its own setbacks as well. More specifically, the gameplay reveal for Halo Infinite, a planned Series X launch title, fell totally flat. Fans were let down by the visuals, especially since this was supposed to be their marquee next-generation game. Nowadays, this reveal is remembered more for its notorious Craig meme than anything else. Halo Infinite was set to launch later that year, and it looked nowhere close to being ready. It certainly didn't look worthy of headlining a brand new console generation. In response to the negative feedback, it was announced that Halo Infinite would be pushed back a year, missing the Series X launch. It goes without saying this was a huge blow for Microsoft. The Series X was supposed to launch alongside the new era of their biggest franchise, but now they just lost their key launch title. And to make matters worse, they didn't have any other first-party game ready to take its place. But luckily for Xbox, these blunders were largely overshadowed by the fact that there earnestly was a lot to look forward to within the Xbox ecosystem. They would be looking to build on Game Pass, their gaming subscription service first introduced in 2017. Commonly referred to as the best deal in gaming, Game Pass served as a genuine selling point for players hoping to save some money on new releases. On top of that, in September 2020, Microsoft announced their plans to acquire ZeniMax Media and its game publisher, Bethesda. This meant massive IPs like Fallout and The Elder Scrolls would now fall under the Xbox Games banner. This also granted Xbox console exclusivity to highly anticipated games like Starfield. I'm not sure if it was intentional or if the deal deal just so happened to come together at the perfect time, but seeing Xbox land such a storied publisher just 2 months before their new console was set to launch felt like such a shot in the arm for the brand. And they kept the good news rolling by announcing the Xbox Series S in September as well. This was a cheaper, less powerful version of the Series X, but would still be able to play all the same games. For those looking to enter the next generation for the cheapest price possible, the Series S would be hard to beat. And it looked like it could be a big advantage for Microsoft, as Sony would have no comparable version of their PlayStation 5 hardware. The Series X and S were set to launch on November 10th, 2020. And while excitement amongst the community did remain high, there were some serious roadblocks that would need to be overcome. It cannot be ignored that PlayStation had all the momentum leading into the 9th generation. The PlayStation 4 had been a smash hit, while the Xbox brand was dragged through the mud. And what's important to note is that the PS4 Xbox One era was the first generation where many gamers had ditched discs, building massive digital libraries instead. And with both the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series consoles being backwards compatible, a big selling point was that those digital libraries could move forward with you, assuming of course you stick within the same ecosystem. And with about twice as many PS4 digital libraries out there as Xbox One's, Microsoft was going to be at an immediate disadvantage no matter what they did. Another barrier would be the chip shortage, which severely hurt both Sony and Microsoft's ability to produce their new consoles. If you went through the process of buying one of these systems at launch, you no doubt felt the effects of this, as they just could not keep up with the demand. This affected both companies, so it's not so much an Xbox versus PlayStation thing, but it is interesting to wonder about an alternate scenario where Xbox is somehow able to manufacture their consoles quicker. Could they have jumped to an early lead as impatient gamers went for the first next-gen console they could get their hands on? I do think it's possible, but through no fault of their own, Microsoft and Sony were in the same boat, competing head-to-head as they so often have. As we inched closer to the official start of the 9th generation, it was time for Xbox to prove to gamers around the world why they deserved a second chance. The Xbox Series X and S officially launched as planned in November 2020 to glowing reviews. The Series X was praised for its power and meaningful new features like Quick Resume that made load times faster than ever before. The Series X also did something that I personally wish more tech companies did, which is that they stuck by the things that worked. No need to reinvent the UI or drastically change the controller every generation. I love that they kept the things people liked and focused on improving that experience to make it even better instead of trying to reinvent everything just to say they did. Meanwhile, the Series S was also very well received. Reviewers were impressed by what the machine was capable of despite its much smaller size and cheaper price. It was seen as a fantastic entry point to this next generation. The only real complaint for the Series consoles was that there just wasn't a lot to play. As mentioned previously, their initial big launch game Halo Infinite had been delayed. This meant there wasn't any major exclusive launch title that made the consoles a must-have on day one. And I think for Xbox, this was particularly damaging, as they had gained a reputation for less than stellar first-party output during the Xbox One era. To start off a new generation with the exact same problem was very frustrating for fans and caused hesitation for potential new or returning customers. Perhaps as a result of this, Xbox quickly found themselves in an all too familiar position. They once again started to fall behind PlayStation. Xbox stopped reporting their console sales numbers back in 2015, so we don't have the exact data, but it's been estimated that Sony's PS5 has outsold the Series X and S 3-1. While I don't think anyone was particularly surprised to see PlayStation still on top of the rivalry, it was pretty concerning to see how dominant the lead became. And once reports came that said Series X and S sales were starting to fall behind the Xbox One's trajectory, it was panic mode. Not catching PlayStation is one thing, but actively losing a large percentage of your own personal install base simply cannot happen. No matter how solid the console was, interest for the Series X just wasn't there, and Series S didn't end up as the needle mover Microsoft had hoped. On paper, the Series S was a very smart move and should have been a massive advantage for Xbox. Unfortunately for them, this was quite literally the worst console generation in gaming history to do this. And let me tell you why. The Series S exists for a very specific and also very important group of people, the casual gamer. These are the people who own a console simply to play Fortnite, watch Netflix, and nothing more. There's obviously nothing wrong with this, and in fact, what I'm describing makes up a pretty large percentage of the gaming world. This is relevant because these kinds of gamers usually don't care all that much about next generation consoles. They don't care if it can do 4K or ray tracing or AI upscaling or whatever other fancy stuff you throw in there. All they're worried about is if it can play the games they want to play. For those gamers, the Xbox Series S seemed like the obvious answer. Xbox was betting that when it came time for Call of Duty or NBA 2K to drop the last generation, the Series S would be a very tantalizing option, and maybe even bring some PS4 owners back into the Xbox ecosystem. But there was just one problem. Those games that we're describing never actually dropped the last generation. As I make this video, we are 5 years into the 9th generation of consoles, and games like Call of Duty, NBA 2K, and EA Sports FC continue to be released on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Live service games like Fortnite continue to be supported with new updates on those platforms as well. And we've even seen games going backwards, such as Marvel Rivals getting a last generation version after its initial release. So as it turns out, any gamer who would have been catered to by the Series S ended up being catered to right where they already were. I don't want to act like the Series S was a total failure. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who made the jump to next gen thanks to this console. But as we've gotten farther into the generation, it's become clear that the Series S has been a lot more trouble than it's worth. And this is primarily because of Xbox's parity clause for developers creating games on Series X and S. What this means is that the features of the two versions need to be the same. Obviously, the Series X version would look and run better, that's the whole point, but the actual content itself has to be identical. Once again, a logical and understandable decision. Allowing games to be made that aren't compatible with Series S or are completely different on Series X goes against the entire selling point of a cheaper next generation console. If everything can't run on it, then it's not a next gen system at all and would instead be stuck in some weird limbo. So while it all made sense, this would eventually become very problematic. As console generations progress, you will always see games starting to look and run better as teams learn how to get the most out of them. But when it came time for that to happen with the 9th generation, many developers were finding themselves held up by the Series S. Some simply saw it as an annoying extra step, but others are having trouble even getting their games out on Xbox because of this. The most famous example came from Baldur's Gate 3, which had its Xbox release delayed because they could not get split-screen co-op functioning properly on Series S. The Xbox version ended up coming out several months late, while the PS5 and PC version got released on time. What this meant was that PlayStation ended up getting one of the biggest games of 2023 as a timed console exclusive, something they would usually have to pay a pretty penny for, but in this case, they got Baldur's Gate 3 without doing literally anything. So in conclusion, I don't think the Series S was a bad idea, it was just very, very poor timing. And I do think it's fair to say the potential benefits and aspirations of the Series S did not come to fruition. If they could go back and do it again, it probably would have been better to skip this model altogether, or perhaps invest in a portable device that could be seen as the less powerful SKU instead. I know that's easy for me to say when I have 5 years of hindsight to work with, but these people at Microsoft get paid a lot of money to try and predict what the market wants and needs. In the case of Series S, I feel like they missed that mark. Either way, sales of the Series X and S were nosediving, and the generation was quickly slipping away. Microsoft would need to pull off something big if they wanted any possible chance of a comeback. And so, in 2022, we got the most defining moment of the series generation, with Microsoft announcing plans to purchase Activision Blizzard King. In what would be the biggest gaming acquisition of all time, Xbox would now gain control of franchises like Diablo, Warcraft, Overwatch, and Candy Crush. And of course, they would also be getting ownership of the most successful IP in modern gaming, Call of Duty. This was a bombshell announcement, one that set the gaming community ablaze with a million different questions of what this meant going forward. Most notably, would they dare make a game as big as Call of Duty an Xbox console exclusive? The fact that this was even a possibility absolutely terrified PlayStation, and yeah, I can't blame them. A recent report from Matt Piscatella at Circana showed that among the top 20 all-time best-selling games on PlayStation platforms by dollars, Call of Duty takes up 11 spots. If Microsoft were to take this series away from PlayStation, Sony would unironically lose billions of dollars of yearly revenue overnight. And that's before we even mention the major impact that decision would have on the console market. Now, at first, Xbox was not guaranteeing that Call of Duty would remain multi-platform, but then the FTC got involved and it was a huge thing, and in the end, they made a deal with PlayStation to keep COD coming to the platform. So you may ask, why was this such a big deal then? Obviously, it's a lot of nice extra revenue for Microsoft to own these franchises, but if they're not exclusive, then what really changes? Well, I think this acquisition was the catalyst of everything else we will discuss throughout this video. Because while the Activision Blizzard deal was no doubt great for Microsoft, I believe this move would ultimately be the kill shot to Xbox as a console brand in the years that followed. You see, the Activision purchase put a new pressure on Xbox that had not been there previously. It may sound crazy, but for a company as big as Microsoft, Xbox was probably not even seen as a top priority, but that changes after a $70 billion acquisition. Suddenly, Xbox was under the magnifying glass of Microsoft leadership, and anyone who's been following the trajectory of the brand knows they were not going to like what they found. With more pressure on Xbox than ever before, they would need to find a way to up their revenue, and they would need to find it quickly. Thus, the multi-platform pivot began. The Activision Blizzard deal officially closed on October 13th, 2023, and just 4 months later, everything within Xbox changed. They announced that 4 of their previously console-exclusive titles would be coming to PlayStation and Nintendo platforms. These 4 games were Sea of Thieves, Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, and Grounded. At the time, Xbox claimed these 4 games would be the only games making the jump, and pitched it as an experiment to see what value could be found for these IPs. But it became clear almost immediately that this statement was just marketing fodder. Before you knew it, the floodgates were open. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, which had been marketed as an Xbox console exclusive for years, was confirmed to be coming to PlayStation 5 at Gamescom 2024. Earlier this year, Forza Horizon 5 made the jump to PlayStation. And in August, Gears of War was ported to Sony's hardware as well. With Phil Spencer saying there are no red lines on what games can come to other hardware, it is only a matter of time until Halo also loses Xbox exclusivity. What was once unthinkable has become the new normal, with Xbox acting more like a third-party publisher than a console manufacturer. This timeline is not a coincidence. It was a direct response to Microsoft leadership needing to see more money from the brand. The quickest and easiest way to do so was by putting their first-party games elsewhere. This is why I say the Activision Blizzard deal was the end of Xbox. I am not saying it was bad for their bottom line or bad for their pockets, but I am saying it was the straw that broke the camel's back and forced Xbox to go down a path none of us would have ever thought possible just a few short years ago. There's been a lot of online discussion about exclusive games and their importance. And ultimately, this comes down to your own personal preferences and style of play. But if I can speak for myself here, the only reason I buy consoles is for their exclusive games. If tomorrow every Nintendo game was on PlayStation, I would never buy a Nintendo console again. It's really that simple. So for someone like me, Xbox consoles have become completely unnecessary. And regardless of your opinion or how you play, you cannot deny that Xbox making the move to PlayStation and Nintendo consoles crushed their brand. It felt like they were waving the white flag. Xbox leadership will say it wasn't them giving up, and maybe they're telling the truth, but at the end of the day, it's all about perception. And when you see longtime Xbox exclusive franchises like Forza and Gears going elsewhere, the perception of that is overwhelmingly negative. So now your console brand is seen as dead, and no new customers are going to want to buy into a dead console brand. But the brand is dying because no one is buying in. This cycle is almost impossible to break, and that's why Xbox has had no choice but to just double down on acting as a third party, while hoping enough of their core audience are willing to stick around. But in more recent weeks, it seems like they aren't even too interested in keeping their core audience either. Throughout this entire series, there has been a common trend amongst all the consoles we've covered. Whether they were successful or not, there was always a price cut at some point after release. Oftentimes, this move has been a jumpstart to a console making a comeback and finding its audience. With the Series X and S struggling, it's safe to assume they received a price reduction as well, right? Nope, because this is the 9th generation of consoles we're talking about here, where all former logic has been thrown out the window. In May of 2025, Microsoft announced that the cost of Xbox Series consoles would be increasing, with the Series X going up by $100. Meanwhile, the Series S would get bumped by $80. We all know there are a lot of economic factors at play here that are outside of Microsoft's control. And yes, nearly every large company on Earth has raised prices in recent months. But it's particularly devastating for Xbox. An Xbox Series console is a bit of a hard sell as is, and now they've just upped the price. The bad news never seemed to stop, as 2 months after raising prices, Microsoft hit Xbox with a giant round of layoffs. They also canceled multiple projects like Rare's Everwild, Contraband from Avalanche Studios, and the Perfect Dark reboot. Back in February of this same year, Phil Spencer had gloated about how thanks to their size, they could afford to give these teams as much time as they needed to make their games. But once Microsoft stepped in, that time suddenly disappeared. For an Xbox fan, it felt like things could not get any worse. But actually, they were just getting started. In September of 2025, Microsoft announced another round of price increases on their hardware in the United States market. An Xbox Series X will now run you a staggering $650, which is $150 more than it cost at launch 5 whole years ago. Oh, by the way, if you want the 2TB model, that will set you back $800. For those keeping track, this is now $50 more than the PlayStation 5 Pro model. And what's maybe even more egregious is that the 1TB Series S is now $450. So a device that was made specifically to be a cheaper, weaker option is now just $50 less than a standard digital model PS5, rendering it almost completely useless. And as if console prices increasing this much in a single year wasn't enough, Microsoft kicked off October by announcing a 50% increase to Game Pass subscription prices as well. Game Pass Ultimate subscribers will now be expected to pay $360 a year to keep experiencing Game Pass as they currently know it. Now, is there $360 worth of value in a yearly Game Pass subscription? Assuming you play a lot of games, yes, there certainly is, but that doesn't make it any easier to accept. Game Pass has been touted for years as the best deal in gaming, an offer so good that you would be stupid not to sign up. However, after this price increase, it's become a very premium service that may still mathematically be worth it, but it's a much harder sell to the average gamer. With Xbox first-party games now playable anywhere, and their subscription service losing a lot of its inherent value, all while console prices are higher than ever before, it does raise the question of why anyone would still buy an Xbox console. Unless you are doing it out of pure brand loyalty, I see no logical reason. I think what's really kind of tragic about this whole thing is that Xbox was seriously so close. When you look back through their decisions over the years, it's obvious what they were planning. They bought tons of studios and publishers in order to have a first-party output that was unmatched, and in doing so, all of these teams would allow for an unbelievable amount of output for Game Pass. Ever since the service launched in 2017, Xbox has been trying to reach a point where you can constantly expect huge releases every month. It's a goal that I would have thought impossible in the gaming space. But what's crazy is they actually kinda pulled it off. In 2025 alone, Game Pass users got Avowed, South of Midnight, Oblivion Remastered, Doom the Dark Ages, and Grounded 2 from Xbox internal teams. Before the end of the year, they will also get Ninja Gaiden 4, The Outer Worlds 2, and Black Ops 7. This is, of course, before I've even mentioned all of the third parties and indies, including 2 of the biggest games of this year, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 and Hollow Knight Silksong. In many ways, 2025 was when everything finally came together. The vision for Game Pass and the spoils from the billions of dollars you spent acquiring teams had actually arrived. This could have been viewed as the greatest year to be an Xbox player ever, but instead it all got overshadowed because Microsoft panicked. Saving a console is no trivial task, especially when it's part of a hardware brand that has been struggling for many years before it. But when it comes to the Series X and S, it almost feels like no legitimate attempt was even made. As the Series consoles struggled, Microsoft could have focused on making better exclusive games that would entice new players. They could have tried for price cuts or console revisions that made their ecosystem more attractive. Instead, they gave away nearly all of their exclusive output to their main competitor while simultaneously making prices skyrocket. In my opinion, it is the decision-making of a company clearly interested in leaving the console market, but too afraid to actually commit and make the leap. It feels like Microsoft is more interested in bleeding their whales dry before this whole thing implodes than they are in trying to find any actual solutions. I think it's clear to see for anyone paying attention that Microsoft leadership has totally taken control of the Xbox division. Guys like Phil Spencer are nothing more than a mouthpiece at this point. And what the Microsoft overlords see is a console brand losing them money, an unsustainable subscription service, and their games making millions in revenue on other platforms like PC and PlayStation. Is it really that surprising then that they've gone down this path? As we look to the future, there has been an expectation that Xbox will give it one more go, but recent rumors have come out suggesting that the next generation Xbox may be cancelled. Other reports have refuted this and claimed the console is still going to release as planned. But I remember when I was told the rumors of Xbox going multi-platform were untrue too, and we all saw how that went. Even if this next system does release, it will be very different from the Xbox we know today. Reports suggest that it will be closer to a PC than anything else, another sign that Microsoft is slowly trying to wean their audience out of the console space so they can drop it for good. Don't get it twisted though. Yes, I've ripped Xbox apart in this video, and no, I am not a fan of the decisions they've made, but a gaming industry without Xbox consoles is undeniably worse off. It leaves PlayStation as the only traditional home console in the market, and with monopolies comes worse business practices that all of us will have to deal with. So while I certainly wouldn't celebrate Xbox leaving the console space, whatever it is they're doing right now is not gonna cut it. And I see no realistic scenario where a potential next generation machine is able to find any sort of success with the policies and plans they've put in place. But then again, I'm not so convinced they even want it to succeed in the first place. I hope you enjoyed this episode of how not to save a console. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, it helps out the channel a ton. And let me know in the comments below what you think about the Series X and S generation.